now live, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, okay, welcome everybody to Strategy and Performance Scrutiny Board, 23rd of February 2022. Thank you for all of those joining us. I think we've got a couple more members to join us, but I'm sure they will do very soon. It's been a bit complicated in the run up to this one with one or two people dropping out and things. So can we just confirm the substitutes nominated for this evening, please?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Cook and substituting is Councillor Lee.
Good, excellent. And I think it will be appropriate, Oren, just to let people know that Mike won't be with us this evening. He's got personal problems. We will have the assistance of the very able Lauren Lovely to help us out on this one. So that's good. Members' interests, to remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests they might have in relation to the items included on this agenda. You can either shout up now or when it becomes appropriate. Have we got anything to say at this minute? Can't see anybody. No, that's good. Admission to the public. It's not recommended that the public be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of the items of business on this particular agenda. So any members of the public who are joining us, welcome. Let's start with the first major item on the agenda, that of the minutes of our meeting on the 26th of January 2022. Does anybody have any concerns about the accuracy of those minutes? Anybody want to highlight anything, or can we accept them? Can't see anybody raising an issue, so would somebody like to propose that we accept those minutes? Thank you, Bob. Seconded by George. Thank you. All those in favour of accepting the minutes as a true record? Thank you very much. So let's go on to the first major item, if you like. Item 5, Calderdale Council's Equality Objectives 2021 to 25. I think with this lengthy report, it's important that we remember that it's an opportunity for members to consider the work on corporate equalities of the council as not just an employer, but a commissioner and service provider. And this discussion will provide us with an overview of the work and the progress made to date. And we should, as members, aim to consider the action plans that underpin the work and to consider what progress is being made and whether this is appropriate progress or whether there should be more or different progress. So just that as a reminder, this evening, I think Zora is joining us from holiday to kick us off, and then we have some colleagues to deal with the specific aspects of this one. Do you, Zora, want to kick us off? Give us perhaps any highlights or additions or updates which are relevant to this particular report to get us going.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I think if I can just give an overview of what's in front of you, and then there are a number of colleagues that are with me who are experts in various areas, so can then sort of answer any questions or comments or any queries that members may have. So what you've got in front of you as part of tonight's pack is a suite of reports that went to the meeting of our cabinet last November. They're being brought here today, so really by way of information and for members to start thinking about what the action plans tell us, what our objectives are we meeting those objectives, and have that more detailed discussion then around what action members might want to see officers taking to actually improve equality standards across the authority. And as you've said, Chair, that's in terms of us as an employer, as a service provider, and of course as a commissioner. So you've got a set of objectives, first of all, that are for 2021 to 25, and they're sort of reviewed every 4 years, and they're supported then by what are an annual suite of papers that come through. And what the first report does is it just basically sets out really that the customer is at the heart of what we as local authority do. And we need to understand that people have different needs and different challenges, perhaps, in the way that they can access some council services, but also in terms of us as an employer, thinking about the different needs that some of our different groups of staff may have and how we respond to that. And then that report just reminds us that the council's three priorities are reducing inequalities, growing the economy, and building a sustainable future, and just how then that starts to knit together. And then moving on from that, what we've then got is the Equality Progress Report for 2021, and that's based on data from April 20 to March 21. And of course, members don't need me to remind them that that covers a period of the pandemic. So in terms of service delivery, some of the examples that you'll see quoted in the report will be a little bit different to what you'd perhaps expect to see normally, because we were working in different times. But that report really gives you some quite detailed demographics of Calderdale first, to give you that overall context that we as a local authority operate in and what Calderdale the place looks and feels like. It gives you some different service examples, ranging from customer first, register office, and other services, but also then starts to break down some of the data that comes through from different places, be it our schools or antisocial behaviour. And it's that rich data that starts to inform for us the way that we do decisions. And then following that, you've got a very detailed report then, which breaks down our workforce and actually gives a lot of information about looking at what our workforce looks like, feels like, is it changing, and starts to think about, in terms of action planning, what we do to support our workforce and what we do to, again, increase that overall representation. We want Calderdale the workforce to actually represent Calderdale the place. So you can see, as that story gets told through those demographics into our workforce, how those patterns tend to work through. And then I think the final report that you've got, which was sent to, I think, separately, is the gender pay gap report. And I think, as always, with Calderdale, that's a positive picture that we have in Calderdale when we look at that. And you'll see some discussion in the report, it references that we're looking at ways that we can actually expand and make that even more richer piece of information for members, start to look at that sort of ethnicity pay gap as well. So that's a suite of reports, which I think gives a fairly comprehensive overview of Calderdale as a council in terms of being an employer, service deliverer and commissioner. So I think at that point then, Chair, I'm happy to open out to questions or discussion. And I don't know if our cabinet members want to say something before we get to that point or not.
Can I just ask, thank you for that, Zora. Can I just ask whether any of your colleagues have any sort of updating or perhaps guidance or comments to make, or, and I say this very positively, or are they just happy to answer questions, or do they want to highlight any particular aspects for us? And then perhaps we'd ask the cabinet members to say something on it.
I can't see any hands going up from them.
Okay.
So, but just for information, we've got Jackie here as our head of HR and organisational development. We've got Jill here as one of our lead commissioning managers. I think I've got Deborah here. I'm looking, but I can't actually see it at the moment.
Yeah, and her apologies, Zora.
Oh, did she? Right.
Yeah.
Okay, then. So, yeah, but they're not indicated to speak at the moment, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's fine. Susan, I think I can see your hand up there. Do you want to come in?
Yes, actually. I want to zoom in, and I suppose I should declare an interest in the sense that it's about age. It's about an inequality relating to age.
I think we all
which is, of course, a protected characteristic.
Indeed.
Unfortunately, there is a group of women, of which I am one, who will not receive their state pension until they're in their late 60s, mid to late 60s, and that is causing a lot of financial difficulties for a very significant number of women. And I was looking at the things like passport to leisure, and we talk about health inequalities and so on and so forth. So I wondered if it could be clarified: are our services like discount services, things like passport to leisure and so on, are those? It does say over 60s. If that's the case, then that's great. But I am aware of other places where concessionary services are not available to anyone unless they've achieved state pension age, which I would say is actually unfair, and it is an inequality, because actually those, if we really are serious about protecting age, then the women who've fallen short of the old state pension age and have 7 years actually be helped to stay healthy and access to services and so on. So it's a very straight one question. Secondly, there's no reference, I can't see any reference unless I've missed it. Does mental health not fall into this remit? Because there doesn't seem to be anything here about access to mental health services.
Thank you for that, Susan. Who would like to pick those up? The cleft stick that older ladies have fallen into pension-wise, and the mental health aspect. Dora, do you want to pick up on that, or do you want to direct us to a colleague?
Sorry, yeah, could you hear me?
I couldn't hear that first bit until you said, sorry, could you hear me?
Sorry, yeah. So we have our passport to leisure scheme. Now, I'm just checking, because as far as I'm aware, Councillor Press, it is age 60 for our scheme within the council. But I'm just trying to double check and confirm that for you. So I'll have a look at that. And then in terms of the access to mental health services, I think as an employer, we have a lot of support in place for our staff by way of counselling. And we, of course, do recognise that staff may have mental health issues that perhaps need additional support within the workplace. And we do, of course, make reasonable adjustments where that presents or where member staff flags up to us that they do have a need. And in terms of access to services, then all of our sort of social care services, access to services, we are mindful of that. But I guess sometimes with these reports, it's how big a report do you want us to present? Because there's a whole wealth of services that come through from our adult social care world, our public health world, that we could, of course, include within the reports that come to this committee. But this is actually an overview, so it doesn't have all of that detail within it.
We could get that information separately.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. If you could clarify the over 60s thing, because it's important.
Indeed. You took the words out of from my lips there, Susan. I think we need that information. And we will leave you with that, Zora, to pick up on, shall we?
It is over 60.
It is.
I've just quickly tried to apply for it online. It's over 60. So we expect to see Councillor Press there regularly.
I'll have more time in the future, yeah. Definitely.
Thank you for that. Yes, Councillor Dacre, Sylvia, did you want to come in on this later, as you do occasionally, or now? I picked up your hand earlier.
Yes, sorry. Well, you just asked if any of us wanted to, or somebody asked if any of us wanted to say anything. I was just going to say that, as has been noted, these are, it's about 2021, and obviously Cabinet got it in November, and now it's the end of February. So certain things will have changed quite a bit. Obviously, things around COVID have changed a lot, and so, for instance, there's mention in the report about the difficulty we had in employment terms in the work that we used to do, and going out to schools and trying to take on apprenticeships. And I think the good thing is that some of those are now becoming possible again, and the apprenticeship position, I think, has improved considerably since the report was done. So you just need to bear in mind when you're looking at it that it's the time period that they all cover. And just in relation to the mental health point, it's just to confirm really what Zora was saying. Mental health, disability is a protected characteristic, and that can cover mental health issues. So you would be able to get reasonable adjustments for that, but also Calderdale is the sort of employer who will make what are not strictly legally reasonable adjustments, but are nevertheless adjustments for people who might not class as having a protected characteristic, but for one reason or another do just need a bit of flexibility or help.
Thank you for that, Sylvia. That's what I was hinting at when I was saying with if there are any updates, and you've given us a little bit there, which is good. Thanks for that. The next person I have on the list is Megan. Megan, do you want to ask a question of this?
Please, thank you. I want to, well, be very clear that we need to have something in writing as far as mental health is concerned. It's not something I want to see as a separate policy and a separate thing. I think it should be in here. The other thing that, if it's in here, I don't know, but picking up from what Ashley said at the beginning, I don't think we're equal as far as contractors are concerned. Now, if I'm right, I am told that you've got to get registered with the council to be a contractor, and that it is very, very difficult to get registered. So that came from a firm of builders that were in there. Well, it's okay if you're one of the ones that are accepted, but I don't know how anybody now gets accepted, if you follow me. And it's, you know, it doesn't help local builders, etc. So that's all you're getting from me today, Ashley.
I promise. Is that a promise?
No.
That's all I get. Thank you for that, Megan. Councillor Porritt, Victoria, you have had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for this enormous and very thorough and very detailed report. I've read as much of it as I physically can until my eyes just crossed and I couldn't focus anymore. I've got just a couple of things really. One really sort of in terms of the council as an employer and the other one as a service provider. I've mentioned on a previous occasion that I thought it would be helpful for us to hear directly from the staff-led networks. Not necessarily, I think it seemed like a bit of an intimidating prospect for somebody to come in and literally address the scrutiny board. And I'm not expecting them to say necessarily anything different than we're hearing in the reports, but I'm a great believer in hearing from people as directly as possible. And I just think it would be interesting that if there was any discrepancy at all with regard to how those staff-led networks felt that the issues were being addressed and how that's being presented to us, you know, from those sort of a little higher up. I just think it would be a really interesting thing to be able to investigate, whether that's something they could perhaps provide in writing that could come through at the same time as these reports come through to us, just so that we're kind of really hearing things sort of from the horse's mouth, as it were. I just think that would be a useful tool for us as a scrutiny board to be able to sort of access information from a more direct source. And the other thing was looking at, obviously this report refers to a very peculiar and difficult year where everything in terms of service provision was different. But I'm wondering how some of the ways that the services were provided in a different way during the last year has actually presented us with opportunities and has actually shown us a way that things can be more accessible or more inclusive by doing things in the way that was forced upon us through COVID, but might actually have uncovered opportunities. That's it from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Yes, in fact, your last point there was one of my list of comments I can tick off there. I think that there's potential for added benefit in a perverse way out of the pandemic, and I think it's applied in a number of ways in terms of the variable ways of meeting and things like that, which I think has some beneficial aspects to it as well. Victoria, Sylvia, were you going to come in on that one, answer that one? You've got your hand up.
Well, I can say something about it. I was going to come back later on about something else, but I don't know whether Jackie wants to say anything about the request for the groups to come forward, whether she has any idea whether they'd be interested or prepared to do that. I was just going to say that, yes, I think that certainly my experience, for instance, of the Black, Asian, minority ethnic group is that during the pandemic, in a way, it did stimulate quite regular remote meetings between them. I have noticed that that's possibly because in the last few months, workforce pressures have been greater because there's been higher staff absences, they seem to be struggling to get a meeting at the time when they can all get together. So I think in a strange way, because absences were actually quite low during the lockdown, more people were available for the meetings. And as we hit Omicron and absences went up, everybody's under more pressure and there are more people off, more people can't find the time. So I think I would hope that if things do settle down, as we all hope we will do, that they'll be able to pick up certainly that group where they left off, where I felt that they were having some, certainly from my point of view, from the meetings I attended, they were having some really useful meetings and get-togethers. So the only other thing I was going to say, but I was going to say it later, but I might as well say it now, is that the other thing that I think people just might be interested in thinking about in the future is the reference to the age profile of our staff and the need to really future-proof the council to ensure that when we lose people, there's a danger, and it's happened when we lose a person because they're retired, they've been here for decades, all the information and that knowledge is in their head, and they go, and it's really difficult for the people picking up afterwards. And there's work going on behind the scenes to try to make sure that doesn't happen, that we don't get caught short like that, and that people's role profiles accurately reflect what they're actually doing, instead of them having a job title, but in fact they're also doing something else because that's what they've done for a long time and everybody knows they can do it, so they go to them. So to try and make sure we don't have that sort of anomaly. And also the fact that it's going to be very challenging for all councils in the next year or two in terms of staffing because of inflation. People are obviously going to be looking for the highest salary they can get, and it's difficult for councils to pay that. And so it is going to be challenging, particularly for us, because our salaries are lower than some of our neighbouring authorities, because after all we are smaller. So those are again things that there's work being done to try to ensure that we are in the best possible position to offer all the other benefits that you might get from working for Calderdale that you might not get from working for a bigger council that's more anonymous, or even for private companies which might be bigger and again more anonymous.
Yeah, some useful points there, so we thank you. And in fact, you've managed to tick off a couple of my points as well for me there, so that saves my breath on the subject. So thank you for that. Bob, you've got your hand up, I think.
Yeah, that's right, Chair. I'm just thinking mine's more of a process thing than actual commenting on some of the details of the results. We did discuss comms at our last meeting, and I noticed there's quite a big section on the consultation that takes place on this, presumably each year. I know it would be difficult probably with the pandemic and all the issues on that, and getting the interest that we probably need on this. But there is a section on this which I've read through in Appendix 2 with the results. I think 45 responses, I think the report says, and I'm assuming it's reviewed annually. And I'm particularly pleased to see that vulnerable communities and individuals receives the strongest support. So a couple of question on that. Are we happy with that kind of response, or do we need to do more work? I know that the list of who's consulted at the present time on preparing this, it looks quite extensive, both an online public survey and much wider discussion within the council. So is that good, that response, or do we need to do more work reaching more people to try to get them further responses? And just on the actual issues, I think some of the other issues, important issues from that response, from the survey, was on flagged up housing, quite a few flagged up housing, which is quite a bit of detailed report back on housing. in the reports, which I've read with interest. I think that is a key issue. And my particular interest was just reading what the situation was on extra care schemes at Brampston and Fernley. Brampton's, unfortunately, because it's such a difficult scheme to design, and they've had a lot of snags. And I just hope people will be moving into that really important scheme, but this spring, because it really has been delayed. And Fernley, I just hope we are getting some movement on that, because it is difficult. Extra care schemes are very, very difficult to get off the ground, on the ground and moving. So I'm just flagging that up, because I think there's a lot of housing issues there. They are key issues, and I hope we are working, our housing colleagues are working as hard as they can to get these moving. So it's just a process thing, particularly on improving, if we need to, on responses.
Thank you for that, Bob. Yes, again, the item on housing you've raised there, I would totally agree with that one. I think that's an important aspect, which was highlighted, I think, in the survey as other aspects which should be looked into, and I would totally support that. Yes. I think it's an important one. Thank you for raising that. Stephen Lee, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was just a point that Councillor Dacre mentioned a few moments ago about when people retire. It's very similar to a discussion we had on Monday night at the audit meeting, when we were talking about risk assessment and business recovery systems. And I think the point that was being made is sometimes we're left vulnerable when people retire and people don't adequately know what they've been doing because they just did it all and didn't really communicate it. So this is just a general point about our systems, that when people are planning on retirement, part of the rundown process ought to be a period where they are allowed to give time to documentation of what they've been doing, so that successors can more readily pick up the job and we're not left vulnerable by it. So I don't think it's an equality thing so much as a general comment about taking care of business. And some of these people have vast knowledge, and if we don't record it, it takes a lot of catching up. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, indeed. It's a sort of almost an HR thing, but we've got HR coming a bit further down the line on this one. It's the handing over of the information and not losing it, which I think is very important. It's partly the old expression that they used to use in the mills, which was sitting by Nelly, in order to learn from Nelly because of Nelly's knowledge and experience. And maybe we should be building something like that into as people come towards the end of their career, they start to pass on the information rather than it just going suddenly. So totally agree with that one. Thank you for that. Susan, you got your hand up again, I think.
Yeah, I was just interested. Just interested to looking at the statistics for the LGBT plus element of the workforce. It's extremely surprising, given our lived experience, I have to say, that the number of people who are declaring as gay or bisexual is so small. I think it amounts to 2.65% of the workforce, which seems to me odd because certainly in the Upper Valley, I can only speak for having lived in Hebden Bridge and having lived in Tomden, there's a highly visible LGBT plus community, and I would have expected, I suppose, that our workforce would not only reflect the national average but be slightly higher. But in fact, we are pretty much 50% less than what Stonewall put as the low benchmark, which is 5%. We're actually half that, less than half of that. So I wondered, is that because people are reluctant to fill in the surveys, or, you know, can anyone shed any light on that? It's just a very surprising statistic.
Yes, indeed. Although, of course, you did preempt it by saying living in the Upper Valley and Hebden as being perhaps an area which was more common for that group of people.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's been
even so,
as ever. Okay, so Jenny, I think you've asked to join in the conversation, and I'll come on to Sylvia.
Yes, thank you very much. I've been making notes, and it's been really interesting. Been some really interesting points made. I'd like to say thank you very much to the officers that have pulled all this information, the reports together, because certainly thinking about that some of the basics about just being reminded about the basics about the demographics of Calderdale and how they are changing was really interesting. I mean, the fact that we've got 7,500 more people than we had 10 years ago, which is quite significant. The changes in our child population and so on. I think that's all really, really useful. And the point I wanted to make from really to echo what Councillor Dacre said right at the beginning is that I think that the challenge during the pandemic of really trying to sustain services at a time when we were told that we had to avoid face-to-face contact was one that I think the staff and of course obviously the voluntary sector were involved in that as well really rose to very well. And it's good to know that I think that one of the things that I've certainly been very conscious of with in my own ward in Park Ward has been that the move to encourage people to do everything online, digitally and all the rest of it is great in terms of our budget. It saves us money because of the way things can be done, but it's also can, if you're not careful, add to the difficulties faced by our protected characteristic groups and so on. So I'm really pleased to note that hopefully later on this summer we're at the moment we've been offering services and appointment by appointment to people who would have wanted to access Customer First directly and weren't confident about doing it online. And we are offering that service in some of our libraries. People can have appointments, but I'm really pleased to say that actually as of later on in the year, hopefully towards the end of the summer, we're going to be restoring that capacity to offer appointments at Horton Street, at Customer First offices in Horton Street, and I think that's greatly to be welcomed. But yeah, just a big thank you it's been really interesting discussion to hear the points that people have made, and I think they're well made about the age profile of the workforce and the retention of experience and all the rest of it. But thank you very much for letting me sit in on the discussion, Chair. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Jenny. And also interesting to hear about your reference to Horton Street as well. I think that will please a number of people. That's coming on soon. Thank you for that. Sylvia, you were wanted to come back again, I think.
Oh, just to pick up on Councillor Press's point about the LGBT representation, and she's right, you're right, Susan, it is below what might be expected, but the section in the report does set out what we're trying to do to improve that, and it is the declaration rate around this topic has improved, but nevertheless there's just under 20% of people don't declare what their sexual orientation is, and it's a personal choice as to whether they can do that. And although the council does tries to explain why we want that information, it's not just prying, and we would appear to be having success because the rate of declaration is going up. Nevertheless, there are some people who are simply never going to declare the sexual orientation, and so we don't know what it is. But the document goes on to say that we're trying to diversify, or have diversified, our interview panels, so that when people come for an interview, they're being interviewed by a range of people from within the council. That we have, as you've already heard, we've got the LGBT group within the council, and they work with HR in particular to inform and assist in drafting policies and in giving their view on all sorts of things that might be going on in the council. So I would say there are strong mechanisms in place to try both to improve our understanding of what our workforce is, but also to ensure that those that people who are LGBT feel that it's a good place to come and work, and that those who are working here feel comfortable doing so.
Good, thank you for that. Any other questions, comments from board members on the subject? Oh yes, Zora, you wanted to come in.
So I was just going to come back to a couple of points that have been raised, Chair.
Yeah,
if that's okay. Yeah, I sort of pick up on Councillor Porritt's point firstly, in terms of working through the pandemic has been really interesting, and I think there have been some new ways of working, some new opportunities that come out of that we shouldn't lose sight of, and we ought to try and embed. So I think really, as an organisation and as a big service deliverer, I think that we've learnt a lot. I don't think we'll ever go back to what we were pre-pandemic, but equally, we're not going to carry on like we have come through the pandemic either. There's going to be a new way, a new flexible, I think, way of working and of delivering services as well. And we have found that for lots of staff, it's been easier sometimes to work from home, when perhaps if they were going to the office, they might have felt too poorly to go into the office, but they've been able to carry on working. And then there are other examples in terms of inclusion, where both, I think, from a public perspective and from a sort of employer perspective, it isn't about one size fits all. Different things suit different people. And then when we start talking about our workforce and the breakdown within our work, I'll use myself as an example. If I look back over my career as a woman within local authority, as a woman with 5 children who was a single parent for most of that time, I couldn't have held down a senior position in a local authority that had evening meetings, for example. But actually being able to participate by video makes it accessible, makes it more inclusive, and actually starts to balance out. So if you can have a hybrid approach, then actually you equalise that opportunity for everybody. And there'll be other people who equally, because of disability or because they care for somebody else, there's lots of other things that come into place. I think the more flexible we can be, the more we will actually do as an employer to really improve some of our equalities work. And that in turn translates to a better service delivery as well.
I very much like that last comment there, that it's not just about inequalities and quite rightly seeking to remove those inequalities, but in the end it does give a better service as well. So it is a win-win, isn't it? We have better supported, more confident, more committed people, and we then provide a better service to people, which is so important. That was going to be one of my summary points as well. Anybody else wish to come in on that? Yes, Jill, you had your hand up, I think.
Off mute. Thank you, Chair. Like my colleague Zora, I just wanted to come back on a couple of points raised during the conversation this evening from a commissioning perspective. And one point was around opportunities created through the pandemic. And I just wanted to say that as a commissioner, every new project that we commission does have a comprehensive equality impact assessment undertaken to consider all of those characteristics, all of the protective characteristics, should I say. And as part of the evaluation and tender process, we look at how providers can evidence, how they can evidence and demonstrate that those services will be accessible to all groups, and also how we engage with providers and community groups at the stage of developing a new specification for a service. We have sought advice through hybrid and new ways of delivering services through the pandemic. So, for example, the community day-based opportunities for provider services, we've consulted with people accessing those services as to what was useful in terms of online, where people still wanted to retain access to a day-based centre, and more bespoke individualised activities that meet individuals' needs on an outreach basis, so that the new model for those services has a mix of all those components that make the service attractive and more accessible to all groups. And a current project, we've just been having a conversation here about LGBTQ groups. And from a commissioning perspective, we have a targeted support and advice service for children and young people who identify as LGBTQ. And we've recently, as part of recommissioning that provision, we've had 3 user groups meet with us to inform what that specification needs to look like going forward. And we've also brought in the voice of those young people so that we've got representation actually on the tender and evaluation panel, so that they have a voice in selecting that provider against those kind of outcomes that we measure. So I just wanted to share that with colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, indeed. I think that's an important area. I mean, one of my comments would have been along the lines of the impact it can have through commissioning in terms of improving the situation as far as other companies are concerned and equality within other companies. And I certainly think that's, again, a very important spin-off benefit to that. And I think that we can even take that further in terms of how we influence other companies across Calderdale and encourage them to run their businesses on a more equality basis that we're doing at the moment. And we can certainly do it through commissioning. We can do it in other ways, I think. And local authorities can have, yes, it's important to do it for their employees and for the service they provide, but it's also important that we try and use ourselves as an example and influence other businesses within the borough to improve the way they operate as well, because we can show them the way it can be done through what we're doing. So I think that's important. Thank you for that. The sort of spin-off, we've also been talking about the spin-off benefits of, perversely, of COVID enabling us to do things. What I would like to think in the future, that yes, we have reacted well to many of the COVID problems, and that has generated some useful changes and approaches or additional services. I would like to think that we use that action and project it forward to be perhaps more proactive rather than reactive to a situation. It's great that we've reacted how we have, but we should learn from that reaction to what we've had to do, and perhaps be proactive as well in those things, and that we can look to ways to improve things rather than just when we're put in a position where we need to. It's not a criticism, it's a saying, it's something we should think about, I think, as an authority to do that. Any other comments from people, or should I move us on to the sort of course of action from this paper? I don't think I can see anybody else.
Would like to, please, Chair.
Sorry, yes, please come in, missed you.
That's okay, no problem. Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to come back on a couple of points, really, just to sort of answer a couple of member questions that have been posed, if that's okay. So if I can take Councillor Lee's first of all, which was about making sure that we workforce plan. It's called workforce planning, really, in terms of knowing who is going to retire. That's if they stay with the council to the retirement age, but planning for that. And what we're doing with regard to that is quite a lot around flexible retirement for staff, making sure that they are able to start to retract, if you like, and reduce their hours, and in some cases reduce their hours and the grade and step down from a particular role. And then we have them still within the workforce so that we can learn from them, as you say, sit with Nellie, as we used to call it, and glean all that information so that it's not all drained out of the organisation the day that they retire. So that's been open to staff, and it's really, really popular. I've just agreed a couple within my service, and what we've been doing is a development plan for people to start thinking about stepping up to management roles. So planning for that is something that we are doing more and more of. Obviously, we're trying to encourage people to think about that, but it's not always possible. So we're looking at the plans and having those difficult questions with employees without suggesting that they need to retire, of course. So it's open to everybody to apply for, but we've been encouraging it, particularly where we've not encouraged VS and VER, because we've had such an increase in the pandemic of people deciding that they can manage on possibly less salaries and they want to go sooner than what they'd anticipated pre-pandemic. So we have been planning for this for some time. In addition to that, we're doing what we call visioning days, which Michael Holgate and his colleague are currently doing with people. It was originally about commercialisation, but that's had a bit of a spin-off into workforce planning. What's the purpose of our service? Have we got the right people in the key jobs for the future, and really planning for that going forward? So just to pick that up from Councillor Lee's comments, we are working on that, Councillor Lee and colleagues, and we'll keep doing so. CLT have got an away day on the 15th of March, and it's something that we want to talk about, the future workforce and actually what we want to attract going forward. Flexibility is a key component of why people stay with Calderdale. We can't compete, as Councillor Dacre has already said, with our neighbouring authorities for salaries, so we've got to offer something very different. We've just done a reward and recognition survey with all our staff to ask them, what do they want to see as part of the record? We can't give them salaries that we can't give them, but what we can look at are the staff benefits, and we're looking at things like the blue card that they do within the police, NHS, fire and rescue, etc., and all the different packages that we can think about, and encouraging them to be part and parcel, which segues me nicely into the network groups that Councillor Porritt raised. We have had on these calls before, one of the network group attendees came from the disability network group and responded to some of the queries and questions, how they feel. But I think it's definitely something that I'd like to encourage in the future. We've got really, really strong network groups now, BAME, LGBT, disabilities, employee reference group, which we started in 2020, which myself and Debs Harkins co-chair, and that's cross-representative of the organisation, and anybody can volunteer. So I just wanted to cover those points. I think I've covered the questions that have been asked from the HR perspective, but happy to take more, Chair, if you need me to.
Thank you for that, Jackie. Are there any other HR questions that we can throw at Jackie? I'm sure she can field them very ably, as she usually does. No, I think you've silenced us on the HR front there, Jackie. Thank you very much. So as far as we're concerned as a board, I think the important thing is, a number of people have said this, but the depth and detail of this report has been most impressive, and we thank you, Zora, and your colleagues for the production of this report. And I think it's important that we make known some of the suggestions which have come up through the meeting in terms of perhaps what could be added to this report in the future. And I think you've made notes of that, Zora, and that they will be in the minutes anyway. So I think that's important. I think it would also be useful to request an update on things at some point in the not too distant future as to how things are progressing later in this year, possibly not this particular corporate year, but certainly during the summer perhaps, or something like that. So I think if Lauren, you could just make a note that we'd like to look back at this one at some point and get some more feedback and update on it. I think that will be good. Does anybody else have any other comments they want to make in terms of future reporting on this particular issue that we would want to include? I see the odd bit coming up on the quotes bit. Lauren, have you picked up anything on there?
Just to say, I'll put it on the forward plan, Chair, and I'll work with Zora on dates.
Thank you very much for that. So thank you for the contributions on this one, officers and members of this board and visitors to the board. That's been a very interesting and positive session. Let's move on, shall we, to item 6. This is about the relatively new Wicker Combined Authority Corporate Scrutiny Committee, which looks into how Wicker is functioning and Calderdale's part in it. I think there are councillors across the West Yorkshire who are members of this, and we have members on that committee. I know George, you're a member. Do we have anybody else who's a member who's at this particular one? Sorry, Megan, you said you weren't going to talk again, but it's another issue. Good. Okay, so we have a report on this. It's a relatively short report at this stage, but I think there's some useful points to make. Does somebody want to kick this one off in terms of giving us some reference to what's been going on in this group? George, you've come along.
Yeah, Chair. Thank you, Chair. No, it's a pleasure to, well, I'm here anyway, but it's a pleasure to be speaking on this item. Yeah, in a nutshell, I don't want to ramble on because I always think the best reports are when people say, yeah, you know, you can just read, you've read the report, ask questions, really. I think that's the best way to proceed.
I think it's worth pointing out is that it is a relatively new organisation. I think you've only had 3 meetings so far. There's been a little bit of difficulty in terms of getting everybody together. You're looking at possible ways of doing.
Yeah, good points regarding the background. There's been 3 meetings, like say Ashley. The first meeting I attended before Christmas, I think it was November off the top of my head, but we weren't quorate in that meeting, unfortunately. That was an in-person meeting, and it highlighted to me straight away how there needs to be a change in meeting approach. I think, like, we're here discussing scrutiny matters online, I think there definitely needs to be a hybrid model at WICA level, and as I understand it, that requires a change in the legislation, but also there seems to be different local authorities doing it differently and interpreting the guidance differently as well. So I think that needs clearing up. For example, after Christmas, we had a virtual meeting because that's when the government said you had to work from home, and that couldn't be an official meeting. It had to be an informal meeting. So it's all a bit of a mess. But regarding the actual scrutiny panel, it's a really great scrutiny panel looking at corporate use of resources. We recently, the biggest item of the year is budget, as we look at within strategy as well. So we also question the mayor as well. That's a big one. And it's quite an interesting one because obviously there's myself on it, Mike Barnes is on it, and Megan's on it as well. And obviously, whilst in the chamber, we might be arguing our own side and our own points. I think it's important to emphasise that as soon as we're there at WICA, we're absolutely on the same side, and we're absolutely batting for the best case for Calderdale. So I think it's important. You know, me and Mike are best friends when we're around that WICA table. So I think it's important to mention that as well. But I'll open it up to members for any questions. You know, members might wish to raise what they consider a priority as well, and I'm more than happy to feed that back. Good.
You're going to be our conduit. Any particular questions or comments from others? I've got one little observation. I find with scrutiny sessions that we, for example, with S&P, have a pre-meeting meeting, which gives us a chance to think about the questions that are likely to be asked, the points we feel we need to emphasise, and so on. And I just wonder whether that's something which had been considered for your group there, George, Megan, in this sort of situation.
Yeah, we've had pre-meetings. We had one on the budget. We had one as well for the meeting before the budget. Yeah, they're very successful, very good, especially on a WICA level because there's so much information. And also it's important to liaise with colleagues as well. So yeah, we do have pre-meetings. Obviously they are limited because people are busy and it's you know, it's quite difficult, but we have had those. I don't know if Megan wants to add anything.
Yeah, Megan, do you want to come in there, and I'll come on to you, Vicky, in a sec.
Yes, please. It was very strange because it's just been said, there's only been 3 meetings and it's a relatively new scrutiny. So I think everybody's struggling a bit to find out what it's trying to do. I was more aware than I am here that the officers thought it should be left to them, but that is my view. It might not be anybody else's view. You know, they're having a new finance system, which is probably costing millions, and there doesn't seem to be any overview of this from members. And I don't know, they don't have what's it? They don't have scrutiny meetings either by hybrid or Zoom. You go or you don't get there, which is a bit of a pain really for some of us. And it underlines any sort of equality, does that. There's an awful lot that would do. I think it's a good report. You don't often get me saying that, but no, I don't think it's a good report. And I think I'd like to do, I don't know what George thinks, volume 2 in 6 months' time, perhaps, to see how, when they've got the bearings as well, whether this has changed at all.
Yeah, thank you for that, Megan. Sue, I think you were in fact the next one up, actually, and I will come on to you, Vicky, eventually. But I think, Sue, I got down the list first. Can't hear you at the moment. I'm sorry.
No, I was actually laughing because there is one thing in life I do not like, but I do not like being called Sue.
No, I've fallen into the trap again. My apologies.
If there's any consolation, Susan, I'm not usually called Vicky either. But there we go. Ashley's being very informal this evening.
I've only got a couple of months left. So hey, what's the matter? It was only just to say that I'm on for the duration. I came on late because they had a vacancy onto the Economy Scrutiny Committee of Wicker, and yeah, I mean it went online because of Omicron. Sorry, it went virtual because of Omicron. But our next meeting is actually a face-to-face one, and it won't be in my time on the council now. But I hope that the local authorities in Wicker and the fire and rescue can kind of sort this one out, because it's a complete. You know, it's
you nearly said something then.
It's mix and match. You know, there's no consistency. The fire authority, for example, all its meetings have been in Bradford Fire HQ, and they at least you knew where you were with that. So it's difficult when people don't know where they are or whether they're going to have to be there or not. So I would imagine, you know, once the mayor of West Yorkshire is a little bit more bedded in, as it were, and these new structures are less new, then it'll all become clearer. I mean, I have enjoyed what I've done, but it is all a bit. I've just seems to me. I don't know whether you find this. It seems all a bit vague. It's all very bit up in the air stuff.
We're getting the odd nod on that one.
Yeah.
So thank you, Susan, for that. My apologies. And Victoria, would you like to come in now, please?
My pleasure, Ashley.
Thank you.
Unless you'd rather we call something more long, formal and complicated. It's just us being awkward. Yeah, I'm really kind of intrigued and potentially mildly alarmed by the sort of level of scrutiny at Wyker level. I mean, I've certainly never heard good things in the past before it was a mayoral authority about the standards of scrutiny, and I do get the impression that in Calderdale our scrutiny is quite sort of well run and well handled, and we have an understanding of sort of our place within that structure. I hadn't appreciated that it couldn't be online. I think that's quite interesting. Is there, if they're not decision-making bodies, why is that the case? Because my understanding certainly with ourselves is that if they're discussion meetings rather than decision-making meetings, that they can be held online. And that just seems like a massive backward step. I'm interested as how often you meet as a scrutiny board, and how much momentum you can build as a board, and sort of how well you're managing to gel as a board if the meetings are not very frequent. And I just, yeah, it's this is important stuff that needs to be scrutinised really effectively. And it is concerning. I know it's new. I appreciate it's new, and it's been a very sort of unstable time. But I would hope that it's going to going to become more effective and potentially grow some teeth, because it's got some very big budgets to scrutinise and to look over.
Yeah, thank you for that. Megan, I think you wanted to come in as well.
Please. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth earlier about speaking. The scrutiny one is quite interesting, actually. I know that both the newish mayor and Wicker have spoken to the high ups in London to try to get their scrutiny to, so it can be a hybrid, if that would work. They have been told absolutely, totally no, because people apparently don't think that scrutiny don't make decisions. Now, I suppose if you look at it, perhaps we do in a way, but one of the meetings Mike Hodge went to in another authority, he was told there in no uncertain terms that scrutiny had to be face to face. You couldn't do it hybrid at all. And I have the feeling that now he's told Mike somebody's going to come up with something. So we'll have to see where that one goes.
George, you wanted to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. Mainly to answer Councillor Porritt's questions. We meet 4 times a year, and I think overall, I do want to give you, from what I've seen at Wyker level, we do have a scrutiny support officer now, and he's absolutely incredible, really, really good. And they've also recently hired another scrutiny support officer. Now, I think they've been on temporary leave, but there will be additional capacity there, and that's brilliant. And that means that we can go to them. We can also go to Lauren if we want information on things. Then we can we can use people like Lauren and Khaled for support. I think Councillor Porritt highlights quite a few important points. Wyker scrutiny is totally different to Calderdale scrutiny. Probably Wyker scrutiny could learn quite a bit from Calderdale scrutiny, if I'm honest with you. But there are challenges, and probably the challenges there, for example, digging for information. If we're quite lucky here to have quite close relationships with our officers, but obviously when it comes to a Wyker level, it's a completely different relationship. And with that as well comes the difficulty of how can you ask questions without having an intimate knowledge of the working practices. That's quite a substantial challenge. The other challenge with that as well is over 4 years, I may build up an intimate knowledge of Wyker, but what's to say that I would be on the Wyker scrutiny panel for 4 years? That changeover is also another challenge when it comes to scrutiny. Councillor Pollard also mentioned relationship building. That is a huge one. I'm lucky enough to, when I was elected at Calderdale level, the first couple of years, I was in face-to-face, I think pretty much for 3 years. I don't know, whilst I'm a massive advocate for online meetings, and Wyker should definitely have online meetings, because when you think about it, we've got people travelling from all across West Yorkshire to Leeds. You think about the pollution, you're thinking about the expense costs, you're thinking about getting there and not even being quorate. They should be online. But then again, how do you actually build those relationships with it being online? They're all fundamental questions that need asking and answers, really. But we'll resolve it. I do think maybe the board might think it's satisfactory to ask Mike and Lauren to do a bit of a piece on the legislation around hybrid meetings, so it can actually be crystal clear on what that is and why on earth different local authorities are interpreting legislation differently. If we can try and gather, do a bit of analysis on that to try and find out actually what the legislation is and where we're going from there, that could be a good starting point. and then we can start to ask informed questions at WICA level and to other local authorities, or maybe we're even doing it wrong. Who knows? That could be my suggestion to the board.
Yeah, thank you for that, George. And Lauren's responded and says she's happy to pick up that thing you throw at her in that response, which is good. My question comes down to what rather picks up on what one or two of you said about the way you work as a group rather than separate political groups when you're on the scrutiny board, which is good to hear and totally understandable. I'm just wondering whether there is any way, with all due respect, to use you guys as a conduit to feed things into that scrutiny board from Calderdale, and for us to come up with proposals, suggestions, comments, have conversations with those who are representing us at the WICA scrutiny. Do you think there's mileage in that for those people who have been on it? Is it allowed?
Yeah, I suppose it all depends on how formal or informal you want the arrangement to be. You know, a formal process would be we obviously, well, we're here anyway at the strategy scrutiny board, but a more formal process would be to set up a bit of a system that would form a precedent for future people on WICA. That could be a good idea, whereby we have formal meetings every 2 months or what have you to get the lowdown. An informal process would be, you know, anyone's more than welcome to pick up the phone and have a chat with me or Megan or whoever else. It all depends on how rigid or flexible you want it to be, really.
Yeah, it's just a thought, you know, feeding it in and using the links that you guys are developing, which I think is important.
And I think, Chair, one thing that I've been keen to emphasise over the past every single meeting I've gone to, actually, and I want WICA to do more work on it, is the extent to which we in Calderdale can benefit from the systems that WICA introduce. So, for example, we asked a question, there was an item about the HR, the new HR and finance system. I think Megan referred to it. They said it didn't really fit within local authorities, the systems that we use for HR. So therefore, they couldn't really integrate it with what we wanted. But it does ask questions. How many things do WICA do, or do we do, that would benefit the other party or parties if you bring other local authorities in? And then you get economies of scale, and therefore you can negotiate price, you can implement improved systems because we might be getting something that we couldn't afford on our own. So it's the extent to which we cross work.
Yeah, I'd like to think we could do something along those lines. Susan, you put a note in there. I didn't quite follow. Does it matter? Is it critical?
No, it was just to say that just because it's across West Yorkshire, the West Yorkshire Fire Rescue Authority, the political groups do meet separately, but then again, it's not quite the same as the scrutiny committee. Just a bit of information, really.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't quite follow the letters. Didn't pick it up. Okay. Anything else that Megan? Are you? Is
yes,
that
please.
a
I'm trying to push to the hand. Yeah. I was wondering. I don't know whether we should have a discussion before the scrutiny meetings in Leeds, or whether we should have it after them at what was discussed, etc.
Feedback.
I'm worried that it's not being looked at very much, except for the report that Tim does as part of his council report.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Anything else that people want to say on this particular subject? Doesn't look like it. So can we accept that and say that's a useful piece of information, and hopefully things will develop over time? We encourage you guys to work at it and stick with the difficulties and perhaps push them out of the way as much as possible. We'll move on to item 7, the work programme. Lauren, do you want any sort of updating on that particular one? On that front?
Just to say the work programme that you've all received is up to date, and Jackie will be coming to present those 2 items next time. If there's anything that members do want to include, that's our last scheduled meeting for the year. So if you want to get in with either myself and Mike or Councillor Evans and Councillor Metcalfe, then that's
please do.
fine. That's in.
If we've missed anything out this year, you feel we should add in, and the final one of the year, municipal year, give us a shout. And thank you very much for this evening's meeting.